Picture this. A vast penthouse overlooking the shimmering city skyline, a lavish party in full swing. At the heart of it all stands Philip Edwards' millionaire mogul polished smile etched across his face as he clinks glasses with his radiant mistress Vanessa Lake. Meanwhile, his pregnant wife Caroline lingers in a secluded corner, her gaze locked on Philip's display of arrogance. The hush that falls over the crowd whenever she appears is deafening. No one dares to question him. No one dares to console her. But beneath the veneer of wealth and extravagance lies a ticking time bomb. And as a critical board meeting looms, nothing will remain the same. Philip Edwards was a man who wore his success like a custom-tailored suit. He walked with the confidence of a self-made millionaire, the child of modest school teachers from the suburbs of Boston who had worked ceaselessly to give him a decent education. His father, Harold Edwards, had always dreamt that his son would do better, become someone the world would respect. No one could deny he had succeeded in that dream. At 36, Philip was the CEO of Edwards Holdings, a multinational conglomerate with diverse interests in real estate, tech startups, and philanthropic ventures that carried the Edwards name in gold letters. Yet wealth and prestige often cast shadows on a man's heart. And in Philip's heart, a storm brewed quietly. One would have to dig deep past the dazzling charity galas and crisp suits to see how his ambition had slowly eroded the values he once cherished. His wife, Caroline Edwards, was a graceful woman of 28, petite, with striking grey eyes and a kindness that seemed endless. She was his college sweetheart, the one who had believed in him when he was just a scrawny kid with big dreams at Harvard. If anyone deserved Philip's unwavering devotion, it was Caroline. However, success has a peculiar way of magnifying flaws. Philip's pride had grown in proportion to his fortune. His humility receded like a tide that leaves only shards of shells and broken glass upon the shore. And with that change in personality came other moral compromises. The first time Philip met Vanessa Lake was at a fundraiser in New York City for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Caroline, then newly pregnant with their second child, had stayed home exhausted from morning sickness. That night, Philip was seated next to a flamboyant socialite named Laura Winstone, and across from him Vanessa Lake, a striking brunette with impeccable posture and a knowing smile. She was the quintessential social climber, wearing diamonds that caught every glint of chandelier light, laughing too loudly at jokes told by hedge fund managers, and batting her eyelashes at any man with a net worth higher than the average G20 country's GDP. She possessed a primal hunger for power that matched Philip's. It wasn't long before the two recognized a kindred ambition in each other. Vanessa Lake's father had once rubbed shoulders with Warren Buffett at an exclusive Berkshire Hathaway event, and her mother was an heiress to a real estate fortune in Chicago. Yet Vanessa was never content living in the shadow of her lineage. She craved her own path to fame, one that would define her as more than an heiress or an accessory in high society circles. She spotted Philip's energy from across the table, how his eyes flicked arrogantly whenever he felt intellectually superior, how he would shift in his seat whenever someone else received more attention than him. She found him intriguing. By the end of the fundraiser, they exchanged phone numbers under the guise of business networking, but both knew it was more than that. Philip had always told Caroline he despised shallow socialites. Yet in Vanessa he found an exhilarating reflection of his own vanity. Their affair began as harmless flirtation, secret text messages, stolen glances at events, and eventually expensive gifts that Philip rationalized as business expenses. Caroline, 5 months pregnant and dealing with complications, never suspected the scope of the betrayal. She had believed her husband's late-night business meetings were legitimate. She had never questioned how he had become so enthralled with philanthropic dinners that ran until 3 in the morning. But the truth of an affair rarely remains hidden, especially when there's an appetite for drama. The tabloids were the first to sniff out trouble-plastering photos of Philip and Vanessa on the front pages. Millionaire mogul getting cozy with socialite, they read in bold letters. Yet the papers couched it as a business partnership rumor, not a confirmed scandal. Caroline saw the images. She asked Philip about it. He dismissed it lightly with a controlling wave of the hand. "Just reporters trying to spin a story, dear. You know how they are." Caroline believed him, or at least she tried. She was pregnant after all. Her health and the health of her unborn child had to come first. What no one else saw was that beneath the facade of concerned father and devoted husband, Philip was spiraling down a path of moral decay. Despite everything he and Caroline had built, he allowed himself to be tempted by Vanessa's allure. He didn't realize that he had opened a Pandora's box of secrets that threatened not just his marriage, but the very empire he had spent years constructing. As Caroline advanced in her pregnancy, her maternal instincts sharpened. Subtle changes in Philip's demeanor, once easy to disregard, became glaring red flags. She could sense the tension in his voice, see the guilt reflected in his avoidance of eye contact, and notice the contrived sweetness in his small gestures of affection. It felt like he was overcompensating, as if each "I love you" came with an unspoken asterisk of shame. One afternoon, while Philip was at a high-profile business lunch with Elon Musk, discussing a potential collaboration with one of Musk's satellite internet ventures, Caroline found herself in the study, rummaging for tax documents. That was when she saw the receipt's jewelry flowers, a hotel suite at the Four Seasons. Her heart dropped. They weren't for her. She tried to remain calm, telling herself it might be a corporate perk or something the company provided for VIP clients. But the sinking feeling in her gut told her otherwise. When Philip returned wearing that confident smirk as he removed his tailored jacket, she confronted him. He tried to sidestep it with half-truths, weaving a tale that the gifts were for an investor, Vanessa Lake, whom he was wooing to back their new philanthropic wing. Caroline's eyes welled up. She had never wanted to believe her husband was a liar, but the evidence screamed at her. "How could you, Philip?" She demanded, tears on her cheeks. "I'm carrying our child. Is she, Vanessa, worth everything we've built?" He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he barked, "Caroline, not now." His tone clipped and dismissive. He was already annoyed at her for playing detective. "We can talk about this after the board meeting," he said, as if scheduling a discussion about their crumbling marriage was akin to booking a restaurant reservation. Caroline felt a stab of betrayal. She might not have had confirmation that Vanessa was his mistress, but everything in her heart said it was true. She wanted to yell to fight, but there was another life inside her. She had to think of her unborn child. She had to protect her own well-being. So she bit her lip and let him storm out of the room, leaving a storm brewing in her eyes. Vanessa Lake was not content to remain a mere secret. She wanted recognition to force Philip's hand so that he would publicly acknowledge her as more than a business acquaintance. Despite her cunning, she lacked the patience for a slow game. The next time she and Philip met late in the evening at an upscale lounge in Manhattan, she pressed him. "When will you tell Caroline about us?" she cooed, running her manicured finger along the rim of her martini glass. Philip shifted uncomfortably in the plush leather seat. "Vanessa, you know I have a lot on my plate with the board meeting. Let me handle things in my own time." She pouted, her voice simmering with frustration. "You've said that before. Meanwhile, your pregnant wife is at home while you're here with me." There was a sly smile on her lips. Must be tough for her to keep up with all the corporate drama. And any other demands, she added pointedly, running a hand over Philip's thigh. He forced a chuckle, though his eyes revealed anxiety. Vanessa was pushing boundaries, yet he was too ensnared by her magnetism, or more accurately, his own ego needed her validation. She flattered him, telling him he deserved more than a simple suburban life with a wife and kids. She made him feel like a king, even when deep down he knew he was acting like a fool. Suddenly, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it and let out a sarcastic laugh. "Looks like the tabloids are talking about me again," she mused. "They're speculating I might be your new business partner." She locked eyes with Philip. "But we both know I'm more than just that." Philip smirked, raising his glass of scotch in a silent toast. Neither of them realized how their arrogance would soon crumble before the unstoppable tide of consequences, financial, emotional, and social. For now they laughed, mocking the pregnant wife who silently waited at home. And their laughter echoed in the high-ceilinged lounge, mingling with the clinking of expensive glasses. Throughout this time, Robert Clark, the CFO of Edwards Holdings, and Philip's longtime friend from their undergrad years at Harvard, observed the changes in Philip with a growing sense of dread. Robert was known for his astute financial sense and calm demeanor. A tall, bespectacled man in his mid-30s with a penchant for carefully ironed shirts. He was the man behind Philip's success in many ways, quietly ensuring the numbers added up, managing investor relations, and always looking out for the best interests of the company. Over the past few months, however, Robert had sensed a disconnect. Philip seemed preoccupied, missing crucial updates and delegating tasks he normally would have handled personally. Even the new project they were pitching to Mark Cuban for a state-of-the-art sports tech venture failed to capture Philip's usual laser focus. Robert began to suspect the rumor about a mistress. He also noticed Caroline's pale face at corporate events, her attempts to maintain a stoic front, and how she always left early alone. One evening after a late budget meeting, Robert found Caroline sitting in the company's break room, staring vacantly at the city lights outside. She looked exhausted. Gathering courage, he approached gently. "Caroline, are you okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice as non-intrusive as possible. She forced a small smile. "Just tired. The pregnancy has been difficult this time." Robert's eyes flickered with concern. He considered asking about Philip, but decided that prying might worsen her distress. Instead, he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "If you need anything, I'm here." "You know that, Wyatt?" "Right?" Caroline nodded, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you, Robert. You've always been so kind. It's good to know someone cares." As Robert left the room, he thought about the gravity of the upcoming board meeting. It was not just any meeting. It was a pivotal point for Edwards Holdings. They were to announce a massive merger that could skyrocket the company's value, or break it if not handled properly. Philip was scheduled to present the strategic vision, a second child on the way, and a rumored affair swirling around. It was a perfect storm that threatened both the family and the corporation. Robert knew he had to step in somehow, but for that, he needed to strategize carefully. Crossing Philip, especially now, could mean losing his own position. Yet Robert was determined not to watch from the sidelines while everything collapsed. 2 weeks before the board meeting, Philip hosted a lavish dinner at his penthouse for a handful of high-profile investors, including renowned hedge fund manager Samantha Blake, who had once been part of a joint venture with BlackRock. Among the dinner guests was, of course, Vanessa Lake, invited under the pretense of being a key strategic partner. The penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dazzling view of Manhattan, was decorated with imported orchids, and each table setting was embellished with gold-plated cutlery. Every detail screamed opulence. Caroline was present, her pregnancy more evident now at 7 months. She tried to smile politely through the evening, but the atmosphere weighed heavily on her. Each time Vanessa tossed her hair and let out a smug laugh, it grated on Caroline's nerves. The other guests, unaware of the personal drama, were simply enthralled by Philip's hospitality and the mesmerizing cityscape beyond the glass. At one point, Caroline felt faint. She excused herself and retreated to a quieter spot in the corner. Vanessa, noticing Caroline's departure, took the opportunity to position herself next to Philip, whispering something in his ear that made him chuckle. Their closeness was brazen, but the other guests seemed oblivious or were too polite to comment. Halfway through dinner, Caroline tried to return only to overhear Vanessa making a snide remark about emotional pregnant wives who can't handle the pressure of high-stakes business. Vanessa clearly intended for Caroline to hear, as she added in a louder voice, "Women like that aren't built for the top tier of society." Philip responded with a half-suppressed laugh, not outright ridiculing Caroline, but certainly not defending her. Caroline froze her heart, feeling like a lead weight. She glanced around, hoping to see a flicker of disapproval in the eyes of their guests, but no one seemed to react. The conversation quickly shifted to another topic: venture capital returns or some upcoming philanthropic gala. Tears threatened to overflow, but Caroline refused to cry in front of these people. She turned and marched out of the room, her mind racing with thoughts of how her life had come to this point. She remembered meeting Philip as an idealistic student. He had once told her that family meant everything. Now it felt as though she was expendable, a mere accessory that Philip could discard once she was no longer convenient. Philip's disregard wasn't limited to Caroline. At the office, he was also ignoring red flags related to the upcoming merger deal. Robert Clark repeatedly requested meetings to review the critical numbers. He had discovered some inconsistencies, cash flow projections that didn't align with the official statements, expenses that were higher than budgeted. But Philip brushed him off, claiming that minor details would sort themselves out. "You know, the bigger vision is what really matters, Robert," he would say, as though financial accuracy was a trivial footnote. Behind the scenes, Robert was alarmed. After cross-checking more data, he realized the situation was more dire than he'd feared. Certain investments tied to Vanessa Lake's social circles were bleeding funds, siphoning money away from the company's core projects. He suspected that Vanessa was pressuring Philip to invest in vanity ventures, high-risk, low-return endeavors that could threaten the company's stability. Desperate for a solution, Robert scheduled a private meeting with Caroline. They met in a quiet cafe near Central Park. Caroline arrived in a loose-fitting dress, looking pale and far too tired for someone in the final trimester of pregnancy. "What's this about, Robert?" she asked, her voice subdued. Robert leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Caroline, I'm worried about the company's future. Philip's decisions lately. They're reckless. Have you ever noticed anything about the investments he's made through Vanessa Lake?" Caroline shook her head slowly. "He hasn't mentioned specifics, but I know she has some influence on him." Her eyes flickered with distress. "Robert, I can't pretend I don't know there's an affair. She's practically mocking me in my own home." Robert pressed his lips together. I'm sorry you're going through this. I truly am. The thing is, the board meeting is around the corner. We're finalizing a major merger that could either make or break Edwards Holdings. If Philip goes in unprepared, or if these questionable investments come to light at the wrong moment, we could see a shareholder revolt. Caroline exhaled shakily. What can I do, Robert? I'm just his wife. He's the CEO. And with the baby coming, you're not just his wife, Robert said firmly. You also have shares in the company, substantial shares. You might have a stronger voice than you realize. People on the board respect you, especially those who remember how you stood by Philip when he was building this empire. They know your intelligence, your heart. He placed a hand on hers. We have to protect the future of this company and maybe protect Philip from himself. Caroline looked down at her swollen belly, recalling how she had once carried hope for a bright future. Now she was burdened with the knowledge that her husband might be the biggest threat to that future. Tell me more, she whispered, steeling herself for the battle ahead. The tension within Philip's circle reached a boiling point at a black-tie charity gala benefiting a children's hospital where none other than the famed Dr. Mehmet Oz was a guest speaker. Philip was on the event's organizing committee, while Caroline arrived separately determined to keep a low profile. As usual, Vanessa Lake was in the spotlight, sashaying around in a designer gown that glittered with countless crystals. She clung to Philip's arm for half the evening, ignoring the public whispers that asked who she really was in his life. Caroline, meanwhile, was escorted by Robert Clark. Though scandal chasers might have invented rumors, the truth was more dignified. Robert simply didn't want Caroline to appear alone, vulnerable to gossip and humiliation. However, the tension in the air was palpable. At one point, Vanessa couldn't resist making a catty remark when she noticed Robert standing protectively by Caroline's side. My, Caroline. Looks like you've already replaced Philip, she said, sweetly loud enough for onlookers to hear. I suppose every woman needs a fallback plan. Caroline trembled, anger boiling in her veins. She was about to respond when Philip approached, wearing a forced smile. Can we keep the drama away from this gala? He hissed quietly, glaring at Caroline as though she were the intruder. That was the final straw for Caroline. She took a deep breath, tears brimming, and spoke loud enough for those near them to hear. You're telling me to keep the drama away. You've humiliated me in front of everyone. You stand here with your mistress mocking me while I carry your child. Does that mean nothing to you? A hush fell in the small circle of onlookers. Vanessa looked taken aback for a moment, but then a smirk curled her lips. Philip's face flushed with embarrassment. He grabbed Caroline's arm a little too firmly. Enough, he said, trying to maintain composure. We'll talk about this at home. Caroline wrested her arm free, her eyes blazing with a clarity that had been absent for months. No, Philip. We'll settle this at the board meeting, she declared, her voice steady. Because I'm done suffering in silence. With that, Caroline turned on her heel and walked away. Robert followed, leaving Philip and Vanessa in stunned silence. In the days leading up to the board meeting, whispers swirled throughout Edwards Holdings' offices. Employees sensed the undercurrents of chaos. Gossip flew in hushed conversations by water coolers and in break rooms. Receptionists, seeing the tension in the eyes of senior executives, braced themselves for fallout. Some said Caroline might challenge Philip's leadership. Others believed Philip would publicly announce new expansions that would overshadow any personal scandal. Locked in his office, Robert gathered every piece of evidence he could find of Philip's questionable financial maneuvers. He compiled documents showing Vanessa Lake's ventures draining company resources. He also uncovered suspicious allocations of funds that were booked under marketing expenses, but seemed to be personal expenditures for Vanessa. Worse yet, some of these questionable transactions tied directly into the upcoming merger, threatening to destabilize the entire deal. Meanwhile, Caroline prepared in her own way. She sought legal advice, confiding in a long-time family attorney named Patricia Holmes. Caroline wanted to understand how her shares could influence board decisions, and if necessary, how to protect her unborn child, should the scandal escalate to divorce proceedings. Though the emotional toll was immense, Caroline felt a renewed sense of resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her children's future and for the legacy of a company she had helped build in countless unseen ways. Philip spent most of his time with Vanessa, dividing his hours between crisis PR meetings and expensive dinners designed to smooth over any potential investor concerns. The tension between him and Caroline was near breaking point. At home, they barely spoke beyond perfunctory greetings. At the office, Philip refused to look her in the eye. And in social circles, the affair was barely a secret anymore. Just a scandal everyone politely pretended not to notice. Through it all, Vanessa reveled in the attention. She even boasted to her inner circle that she was about to become a major figure in Edwards Holdings. She hinted that once the merger was complete, Philip would formalize their relationship, possibly divorcing Caroline in the process. Little did she know that the board meeting would unravel far more than she bargained for. The day of the board meeting arrived a crisp morning in late spring. The conference room on the 48th floor of Edwards Holdings headquarters was a testament to modern luxury. A long mahogany table, plush leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Fresh flowers adorned the centerpieces, and each board member had a sleek black folder containing the day's agenda. The board consisted of a diverse group: seasoned investors, tech entrepreneurs, and a few philanthropic leaders who had tied their fortunes to the Edwards brand. Among them was Margaret Chen, an older woman whose formidable reputation for corporate governance made her a legend in business circles. Then there was Timothy Lang, an ex-Silicon Valley guru who had partnered with Philip on some past startup successes, and a handful of others who collectively held enough voting power to sway any major decision. Philip, wearing a dark grey suit and exuding restless confidence, took his seat at the head of the table. To his right sat Vanessa Lake, dressed in a smart designer outfit, her presence drawing curious glances, but no open protests. To Philip's left was an empty seat, reserved for Caroline Edwards, who had not yet arrived. As everyone settled, Philip cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Today we finalize the merger with Pendleton Tech. This is a deal that will position Edwards Holdings at the forefront of innovation for decades to come. But before we begin, I want to address a personal matter briefly to avoid distractions." He paused, glancing around with feigned gravity. "There have been rumors in the press about my personal life. I assure you these rumors have no bearing on this company's performance or integrity. My relationship with Ms. Lake is purely professional." Vanessa's lips twitched in amusement, but she remained silent. Just then the double doors opened. Caroline Edwards stepped in, wearing a simple yet elegant black dress that accentuated her advanced pregnancy. Her face was pale but resolute. A quiet hush fell over the room. Philip stood, his jaw tightening. "Caroline, you're late," she offered a thin smile. "I'm right on time, according to my schedule." Robert Clark, who had been seated midway along the table, rose to offer Caroline the seat. She accepted gratefully, ignoring Philip's glare. Vanessa kept her expression neutral, but shot Caroline a look of disdain. Margaret Chen cleared her throat. Shall we proceed with the agenda? Philip nodded, regaining his composure. Yes, let's. The first hour of the meeting passed in a somewhat orderly fashion. Philip presented slides outlining the strategic benefits of merging Edwards Holdings with Pendleton Tech. He spoke of synergy market share expansion and improved research capabilities. Board members asked questions, flipping through the detailed dossier Robert had prepared. Everything seemed smooth, too smooth, until the topic shifted to financial reviews. That was when Robert stood and requested the floor. "I'd like to address a matter of urgent importance," he said, voice steady yet tense. "There are certain financial discrepancies I've discovered that relate to proposed allocations under the new merger budget." Philip shot him a warning glance, but Robert pressed on. "Specifically, there are large sums labeled as marketing overhead, but further investigation reveals these funds were invested into Ms. Vanessa Lake's personal ventures. These ventures have limited market viability and pose a significant risk to the company's liquidity." A collective hush fell over the table. Vanessa's face twitched in anger, but she maintained a facade of calm. Philip's face reddened. "Robert, I'm sure any anomalies can be explained. Is this really the time or place?" "Yes," Caroline interjected, her voice clear. "It is. The board deserves transparency. This deal must be rooted in honesty, or we risk everything we've built." Philip shot Caroline a look of disbelief. "Caroline, you're not even a board member." She lifted her chin. "I hold 15% of this company's shares." "Philip, my voice matters here, and I'm speaking." Margaret Chen leaned forward. "Let's hear what Mr. Clark has to say. We need full clarity." Feeling cornered, Philip sank back into his seat. Robert presented the documents he had meticulously compiled. Page after page outlined questionable expenditures, all approved by Philip. Vanessa's knuckles turned white as she gripped the table edge, realizing the severity of the exposure. One by one, the board members flipped through the evidence. Some whispered in dismay. Others narrowed their eyes at Philip. Timothy Lang, known for his data-driven approach, confronted him directly. "Philip, is this accurate? Have you really funneled company funds into these unproven projects?" Philip's eyes darted between Vanessa and Caroline, searching for a defense. He stammered out something about potential future returns, but the words fell flat. The atmosphere grew thick with tension. Caroline seized the moment. She recounted the ways Philip had become distracted, the questionable late-night decisions, and how these behaviors threatened the stability of Edwards Holdings. She didn't air the full extent of her personal betrayal. She didn't need to. The board's concern was with the corporate ramifications, and they were beginning to see the cracks. Finally, Margaret Chen spoke, her tone grave. "Philip, you owe this board an explanation. Did you unilaterally approve these investments without proper vetting? And if so, why was no one else made aware?" Philip inhaled sharply, looking around the table at a sea of expectant faces. For the first time in his professional life, he appeared small and desperate. "I had hoped to generate new streams of revenue," he said lamely. "Vanessa Lake's ventures. I believed in their potential." Vanessa Lake rose, scanning the board with a steely glare. "I wouldn't be here if these ventures were worthless. They're cutting-edge developments in fashion tech and influencer marketing. This is the future of e-commerce." She looked at Caroline, a triumphant sneer forming on her lips. "Some of us have the vision to see that." Caroline did not flinch. "Ms. Lake, you might have convinced Philip of your so-called vision. But these documents show a different story, The board has a right to question your intentions. She turned to the group. And I, as a major shareholder, question whether continuing down this path is wise. Philip tried to regain control. This is a smear campaign, he muttered. Robert, Caroline, you're blowing things out of proportion. But the evidence was too damning to ignore. Tense murmurs echoed through the room. Philip's laughter from nights past, mocking his pregnant wife, seemed to resonate like a ghost in the air, reminding him of how far he had fallen. The board members silently deliberated whether Philip was still fit to lead. The boardroom air was stiff with anticipation, thick with the scent of polished wood, fresh flowers, and something more dangerous revolt. Philip Edwards sat at the head of the table, his dark charcoal suit crisp, his gold cufflinks glinting beneath the recessed lighting. He adjusted his tie with practiced precision, but his confident facade was starting to crack. Behind his neatly folded agenda, he could feel it, that subtle shift in energy. Something had changed. Vanessa Lake sat to his right, poised and smug in her designer suit, her silence falsely serene. Her lipstick was perfect, her hair immaculate, but her eyes darted too often, too nervously. Across from them, Robert Clark reviewed documents with surgical focus. Beside him, Caroline sat composed, her advanced pregnancy barely slowing the sharp clarity in her gaze. She wore a tailored black dress, simple pearls, and a strength Philip hadn't seen in months, maybe ever. Margaret Chen, the longest-serving board member and unofficial moral compass of Edwards Holdings, was the first to speak. Before we proceed with the merger proposal, I believe Mr. Clark has requested the floor. Mr. Clark, Robert stood calmly. Yes. Thank you, Margaret. He glanced at Caroline, who gave him a subtle nod. Before we finalize any strategic partnership with Pendleton Tech, the board deserves full transparency regarding recent financial activity, specifically fund allocations marked under discretionary marketing expenses. Philip frowned. We've been over this. Those were approved line items, necessary capital for external ventures. Robert didn't flinch. The problem, Philip, is where those funds ended up. Multiple transactions were funneled into startups and shell corporations linked to Ms. Lake. He held up a thick file, many of which have no registered products, no teams, and in some cases no physical address. These are vanity projects with no discernible return on investment, and they were approved unilaterally by you. The board members shifted in their seats. Vanessa's smile stiffened. I believe the term is gross misconduct, Robert added, or at the very least a breach of fiduciary duty. Philip's face reddened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Every venture carries risk. I trusted Vanessa's judgment. She's a visionary. Vanessa lifted her chin. You asked me to bring innovation. I did. If this board can't see the future of influencer-driven marketplaces, that's your loss. Caroline leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. What this board sees is a pattern, personal indulgence masked as corporate vision. Philip, while I carried your child, you carried on like the rules didn't apply to you. You mocked my absence while funding your mistress's hobby businesses with shareholder money. Philip stood abruptly. This is a setup. No, Philip said, Margaret. This is accountability. Timothy Lang, another influential board member, chimed in. The merger is now in jeopardy. If this comes to light, investors will flee. The press will descend. You didn't just gamble the company's money, you gambled its reputation. A hush fell. The board was watching Philip unravel. For years he had dazzled them with vision, innovation, charisma. But today, all they saw was a man cornered by his own arrogance. Robert placed a final document on the table. In light of the evidence, I propose a vote of no confidence in Philip Edwards as CEO of Edwards Holdings. Philip's mouth opened, then closed. Margaret turned to the board. All in favor, one by one, hands went up. Robert, Margaret, Lang, several others. Even 2 former loyalists hesitated, then raised their hands with shame in their eyes. Caroline didn't vote. She didn't need to. Her expression said everything. Vanessa rose indignant. "This is ridiculous." "You are not on this board, Ms. Lake," Margaret said coolly. "You may leave." Security appeared at the door as if on cue. Vanessa turned to Philip, waiting for him to speak. He said nothing. Her eyes narrowed. Then she stormed out. Philip slumped back into his chair, eyes dull. For the first time, he looked lost. Margaret turned to Caroline. "Given your significant shares and moral clarity, we would like to formally appoint you as interim CEO. You know the heart of this company. We believe you can steer us through this." Philip looked up, stunned. "You're replacing me with her." "No, Caroline," said softly. "You replaced yourself the moment you put ego before everything we built." A silence followed. Then Caroline nodded slowly. "I'll accept. But only if the merger is paused, our finances are audited, and every employee affected by these reckless decisions is protected." "So be it," Margaret confirmed. The gavel sounded. The coup was complete. As the board filed out, Philip remained seated numb. Caroline passed behind him, pausing only once. "You laughed at me," she said quietly. "Now the board has laughed last." And then she walked out, not vindictive, not triumphant, but certain. She wasn't just the woman he underestimated. She was the woman who rose. The boardroom had quieted, but the storm Philip Edwards left behind still echoed through every corridor of Edwards Holdings. His removal as CEO dominated headlines for days. Business outlets dissected the numbers, while tabloids pounced on the drama. But amid the noise, something unexpected began to unfold. Stability. Under Caroline's calm stewardship, the company didn't just steady, it surged. Investors initially wary of her appointment were won over by her transparency and pragmatic leadership. She made no grand speeches. She made promises and kept them. She reinstated philanthropic programs that had been quietly shelved, redirected funds from vanity projects back into infrastructure and healthcare ventures, and rebuilt relationships with key clients Philip had alienated during his final months of ego-driven decision-making. Robert Clark was her rock, stepping up as CFO, with unshakable loyalty. Together they formed a new core of leadership that blended compassion with clarity. Where Philip had chased image, Caroline pursued impact. But even as the company thrived, Caroline wrestled with more private, complicated questions. She had given birth just weeks after the boardroom coup, ushering new life into a world that had once felt as if it were collapsing around her. Her daughter Lily was a daily reminder of what truly mattered. Holding her in the quiet hours of dawn, Caroline found comfort, but also unresolved grief. She had lost a version of her marriage she once believed was unbreakable. And yet Philip remained tethered to her life, not only by legal co-parenting, but by something deeper history. He visited Lily often, never late, never distracted. Each time he arrived humbler than the last, dressed not in his old custom suits, but in jeans and rolled-up sleeves. He came with books for Lily, sometimes flowers for Caroline, but never expectations. He knew better now. Caroline noticed it all, how gently he held their daughter, how he listened rather than spoke, how he didn't flinch when she referenced the past. One evening, as she handed Lily to him for his visitation, she paused at the door. "You're not the man you were a year ago," she said quietly. Philip's eyes held hers. "I hope not," he replied. "That man lost everything, and almost didn't deserve to get any of it back." They sat together on the balcony that night, while Lily slept inside the city skyline, twinkling like a distant constellation of second chances. There were long silences, but they didn't feel strained, just full of things unsaid, of wounds, still healing. "I've thought about us," Philip admitted. "What we were, what we became." Caroline stared at the skyline. "I've thought about that too. But I don't think we should confuse healing with rebuilding what broke." "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if maybe we could find something new. Not romance, not yet. Just forgiveness." Caroline's throat tightened. She had hated him, cried over him, watched him humiliate her in public, then try to justify it in private. But what she felt now wasn't hate. It was something quieter, sadder, more human. "I can forgive," she said, after a long pause. "But I won't forget. Not because I want to punish you, but because I want to protect what I've become." Philip nodded, accepting the boundary without protest. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." Their co-parenting relationship settled into something resembling mutual respect. Philip stayed true to his word. He attended therapy, took parenting classes, and distanced himself from the toxic business partners who had fed his ego and drained his judgment. Vanessa Lake had long since vanished from the corporate world, her social media profiles wiped clean. Word had it, she was now working quietly in a wellness retreat in Costa Rica. Meanwhile, Caroline began to find joy in her new life. The company her daughter and the rhythm of balance between leadership and motherhood became her anchors. She also started speaking at women's leadership conferences, sharing her story not as scandal, but as testimony. Her message was simple: you don't have to shatter to be sharp, but if you do break, know that you can rebuild something stronger, more honest, and completely your own. Those words rippled far beyond Edwards Holdings. They became quoted in articles shared in forums and cited by women carving their own paths out of heartache and humiliation. Philip watched it all with quiet awe. He no longer envied Caroline's spotlight. He admired her from the sidelines, proud of the woman she had always been and the leader she had become. They weren't a couple anymore, but they were a team, not because they had to be, but because they chose to be for the sake of the daughter who had given them both a reason to begin again. And in that, there was peace. The morning began with a soft pink glow seeping through the windows, gentle, almost reverent, as though the world itself knew this day would be different. Caroline stood by the window, her hands resting on her rounded belly. After months of turmoil, public scandal, and heartbreak, she was finally ready to welcome something pure, something untouched by betrayal. Labor began quietly. No dramatic rush, just a firm certainty in her breath and body that it was time. Robert Clark, as loyal as ever, arrived within minutes to escort her to the hospital. Philip showed up not long after, called by the hospital, and by a deeper instinct he could no longer ignore. For hours, Caroline moved through pain and pushing and prayers. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. Encouragement surrounded her in waves. And then, there she was, a baby girl, pink and perfect, born with a strong cry and calm eyes. Caroline wept the moment she held her every loss she'd endured, tumbling into that single miraculous touch. This child wasn't just her daughter. She was her reset, her renewal. When Philip held the baby for the first time, something in him cracked open. No boardroom, no title, no acclaim had ever felt like this. "She's beautiful," he whispered, tears streaking down his cheeks. "Like you." Caroline, tired but alert, smiled faintly. "She deserves the best of both of us," she said. For the first time in a long while, there was no anger between them. Just reverence for the child in their arms, and for the shared hope that she might have a life free from the mistakes they had made. The next few days were quiet. Caroline stayed at the hospital, cocooned in warm blankets and steady arms. Robert managed company affairs while sending updates to her private inbox. Philip visited daily each time, bringing a little more humility and a little less ego. He didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly. But Caroline saw the change in his posture, in how he held their daughter, in how he waited before speaking. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something softer, more human. One afternoon, as the baby slept in her bassinet, Caroline looked out the window at the city skyline, the same skyline where so much had fallen apart. And yet somehow it looked beautiful again, not because the world had changed, but because she had. As the seasons changed and the heat of summer gave way to the golden hush of fall, Caroline Edwards stood at a new crossroads, not just as interim CEO of Edwards Holdings, but as a woman who had weathered betrayal, humiliation, and rebirth. Under her leadership, the company had stabilized. Analysts who once predicted a mass exodus of investors were now cautiously optimistic. Edwards Holdings had not only survived Philip's scandal, it had been redefined by it. Caroline, once written off as the CEO's quiet wife, had become a symbol of resilience and reform. She never tried to emulate Philip's style. Where he had led with bravado, she governed with clarity and intention. Where he had sought headlines, she sought impact. Her first initiatives were simple but powerful, reinstating ethical oversight committees, cutting ties with vanity ventures, and redirecting funds into education, healthcare, and affordable housing causes she had always quietly championed from the sidelines. Robert Clark remained by her side as CFO and confidant. Together they rebuilt trust internally and externally. Investors began referring to Caroline as the conscience of Edwards Holdings, a title that both embarrassed and humbled her. She hadn't set out to be a hero. She had simply refused to let failure define her. Meanwhile, Philip carved out a different kind of redemption. Removed from the board and stripped of his titles, he began volunteering anonymously at small non-profits, offering financial guidance to struggling startups. He attended every therapy session, slowly rebuilding his sense of identity, not as a CEO, but as a man who had once lost everything and was trying one quiet act at a time to deserve another chance. His visits with his daughter were tentative but honest. Caroline allowed more time, more freedom, as he proved himself dependable. There were still silences between them, still wounds too raw to speak of. But their shared love for their children became a bridge, fragile but real. One crisp evening, as Philip stood at Caroline's townhouse door to pick up the kids, he paused before leaving. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing I could still be something more." Caroline met his eyes, soft but steady. "Thank yourself, Philip. You made the choice to change. I just stepped back and let you do it." And as the door closed behind him, Caroline turned back toward the nursery, the quiet hum of a lullaby playing in the background. She no longer needed to look back. Her future, her children's future, was unfolding beautifully. In the weeks that followed the fallout, a quiet transformation settled over the world Philip Edwards once ruled. The company he had built with relentless ambition no longer bore the same shimmer of invincibility. Shareholders still spoke his name, but not in admiration. Instead, they referenced him in boardrooms and leadership summits as a cautionary tale. Philip had once believed that power made him untouchable, that charm could cover cracks in character, and that a mistress's flattery could substitute for a wife's loyalty. But as he watched his former empire flourish under Caroline's leadership, a sobering truth dawned on him. His downfall wasn't due to external enemies. It was self-inflicted. The board meeting had been a turning point, but the real unraveling began long before. It started the moment he dismissed Caroline's quiet grace as weakness when he laughed at her hurt and stood by as Vanessa sneered at the woman carrying his child. That laughter now echoed in his mind, not as triumph, but as the sound of moral failure. He spent his days in therapy and solitude, reflecting on choices that had cost him nearly everything. At night, he revisited old journals, rereading entries from his early days at Harvard entries, where he'd dreamed not just of success, but of building something with integrity with Caroline. Meanwhile, Caroline pressed forward. Balancing motherhood and leadership, she carried herself with the same quiet determination that once went unnoticed. Her decisions were deliberate, her values unshaken. She restored public faith in Edwards Holdings, not with grand gestures, but with transparency, empathy, and strength. Employees who had once tiptoed in fear under Philip now worked with renewed confidence under Caroline's direction. She never sought revenge. What she found instead was restoration. Of the company's purpose, of her own voice, and of a future she would shape for her children without bitterness. Philip was granted supervised visitation. He held his daughter with reverence, never once taking the moment for granted. And though Caroline didn't speak of forgiveness, her actions told him she had chosen peace over resentment. That was a gift more powerful than any apology he could offer. In the end, Philip learned the most painful and necessary lesson of all success, without humility, is hollow, and love once broken by betrayal can only be mended by truth. And there you have it, a twist-filled journey of betrayal, ambition, and unexpected redemption. We witnessed how Philip Edwards went from a revered millionaire to a fallen figure grasping for the remnants of his shattered empire, and all because he allowed pride and temptation to overwhelm the values he once held dear. Yet from the ashes of broken trust, Caroline rose to claim her rightful place as a leader guided by heart ethics and an unyielding resolve to protect her family and the company she helped build. If you found this story gripping, if it made you reflect on the importance of loyalty, honesty, and the hidden price of reckless ambition, please remember to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you powerful, real-life dramas and cautionary tales that inspire, enlighten, and remind us all of the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.